Though my Doctor's theme suite is over twice as long, there are about the same number of individual clips making up canine traveling music. So I've got a lot to get through, and speed is imperative. K9 actively participates in 12 stories that Simpson scored, but music from only 7 stories is included here. So then, what is the nature of K9's music? Perhaps the most obvious is the upper middle register chords that rhythmically bounce around. At different times, these are scored for organ or electric piano, particularly in the earlier stories. Most distinctly, Simpson adds the xylophone to later scores. The xylophone is not usually amongst Simpson's mallet percussion ensemble because, like it or not, it's associated with a cartoonish character. Instead, Simpson uses it to give a mechanical timbre to his Tin Dog music, and to my mind is never trying to send him up. Thanks to this instrumentation, K9 traveling music is notably rhythmic, featuring either steady, repeated rhythms or varieties of faster, more intense rhythms. The Simpson Horn Ensemble still has an important part to play, providing melodies, counterlines, and harmony. The harmony is the most distinctive K9 feature. For much of the time, we bounce from chord to chord, usually minor, without much relation to each other. There is very little sense of a key, although occasionally stories, adjacent clips, had a similar harmony, so I did what I could to put them together in the suite. The opening 3 clips come from Season 15's Underworld, K9's 3rd story. In Part 4, Jackson and the crew of the P-7E are about to take off, but K9 warns that the Doctor and Leela are not on board, and Jackson orders him to find them. We watch K9 leave the bridge to seek out his master and mistress. Although this isn't the first traveling clip in Underworld, I started with this music because of an anomaly in tempo. The metronome here reads 80 beats per minute, not 60 or 120. Yet, the math works out. 60 beats a minute times 4 is 240, while 80 beats a minute times 3 is 240. So the ratio of our usual tempo is 4 to 3. So what's all that mean? 4 beats of this music is 3 seconds long. And even more practically, the triplet that ends this clip is the same speed as the regular eighth notes in the succeeding 120 BPM clips. There's a good computer. Besides the satisfaction of a brief warm-up to start, this Part 4 clip is actually a callback of earlier music heard in Part 3. There, K9 seeks out Jackson and his crew in the caves, while the Doctor, Leela, and Edas seek out Zero Gravity, heard in episode 35. K9 gets 2 scenes to himself, one going to, the other going fro. The 2 clip is the original K9 traveling music, identifiable by its constant ticking F major chord in the keyboard supported by tambourine, and the muted horns and contrabass clarinet offering suspenseful octatonic harmonies. In retrospect then, that's exactly what happens in the Part 4 clip. Same F major chord, same uncertain octatonics underneath. The fro clip is a variation on the first, with the ticking chord raised to A-flat minor, and the harmony underneath coming from, but never resolving to, E-flat minor. Concluding this introductory segment is a brief clip from Part 3 of The Invasion of Time, the Season 15 finale, where K9 re-enters the TARDIS to begin absorbing data. The organ chords are in a higher register now and flirt with a lower neighbor chord similar to the Underworld trills. K9 has already had a few clips in this story to this point, and all feature these neighbor chord sounds, as we shall hear. As the clarinets and horns bring things to a gruff ending, the organ's metallic timbre rings on with a delicious clustered sound that I quietly add underneath the final horn utterance. That final chord holds in order to prepare for a metric modulation. Quite a few K9 clips are in 3/4 time, 180 beats per minute, or 1 measure per second. So naturally, I collected all these together to form the second portion of the suite. We begin the waltz section with 2 clips from season 17's The Creature from the Pit. The first is from part 3. With his recharging complete, a guard sets K9 on the ground to follow Romana and Lady Adrasta further into the pit. This begins very sweetly, with lovely harmonies settling on C major and a long cello note atop the supporting ensemble. Also present is the xylophone, which, as K9 begins to move off, becomes more rhythmically active, guiding the parallel harmonies this way and that. Then, a short connecting clip from part 2, though here K9 has been put out of action by wolf weeds. Adrasta realizes she needs Romana alive and her metal friend intact, and she turns to stare daggers at the deactivated tin dog. Here, the bass and cello descend in major thirds, while the xylophone beats out an augmented chord. At the end, the parts meet harmonically on G augmented. By the way, in the program, the horns crescendo the same augmented harmonies in the middle register, but this was a 3 hands problem. There were several clips that I had to consolidate like this, and as long as they weren't too compromised by that, it was satisfactory. For me, a musical highlight is 2 dynamite clips from part 3 of The Invasion of Time. We've already heard 1 clip from that episode, and these 2 scenes precede that. K9 ascends a ramp, then walks a corridor, returning to the TARDIS after having destroyed the transduction barrier around the Citadel of Gallifrey at President Doctor's orders. The supporting horn ensemble bounces from minor chord to minor chord, carving out a melody in the middle register. By the end of the first passage, they settle in A minor and resolve to a very dominant-sounding, diminished 7th chord to conclude. Most distinctive here is the organ, playing rapid-fire staccato 8th notes. The mostly minor triads include some lower neighbor chords, as we saw earlier. Something odd happens in the 3rd measure of this passage, and I'm sure someone made a mistake in the recording. I'm just not entirely sure who. The horn ensemble repeats the C minor chord of the 1st measure, but the bass is noticeably on B natural this time. But there's more. The organ part is popping away on C major rather than minor. I'm most inclined to think this is the mistake, but the bass could be wrong too. This is no doubt a byproduct of the nature of the recording sessions. As I understand, Simpson hired quality musicians good at sight reading, so that if a first take was reasonably performed, even if imperfect, he'd go with it. It just saved time and therefore money. I must admit, you don't notice these mistakes unless you're listening as intensively as I have. In fact, I found several other likely mistakes in the recording during the transcription process. However, the final recording of a program is always sacrosanct, and I tried never to second guess it. In addition, as I mentioned with the Doctor's theme, these clips came from recordings that still exist, so I was able to hear more clearly than I might otherwise. I was certainly grateful for Invasion of Time music free from K9's motor noise. The second clip comes after an intervening scene, but connects up beautifully. This time, the harmony stays a little closer to A minor, while the organ chords continue popping above. In a few cases, the chords move also to an upper neighbor as well as a lower. The final chord is particularly juicy, A major, but with F natural in the bass. The next bit is the first of 5 brief clips heard in Season 17's Nightmare of Eden. In Part 1, the Doctor and K9 are being shown to the ship's power unit, but their guide, Secker, seems desperate to get away. The xylophone is joined by a cello playing in a higher register than usual, but their notes are largely copying the roots of the minor chords that support it. The relationship of a minor third between those chords suggests the octatonic scale again. The The resolution to E minor in this passage made a convenient segue to 3 quieter clips, all from part 2 of season 16's The Stones of Blood. First, K9 hears his master's whistle and leaves the TARDIS. This passage merely hints at the K9 style, with an opening melodic neighbor note and rising chords almost in parallel. Second, K9 has met the Doctor near the Stone Circle and begins using his latent bloodhound skills to track the missing Romana. The clarinet and organ play a melody of slowly rising neighbor notes. The minor chords again rise in parallel, though staggered with the melody, mostly creating minor major 7 chords along the way. The music ends abruptly as they find Romana. Third, the Doctor and K9 return to DeFreeze's house, despite the fact that DeFreeze has recently tried to sacrifice the Doctor in a druidic ceremony. As they arrive, K9 detects aliens in the house. This organ's solo music features a few popping chords descending on the white keys over an E natural in the bass. The chords take a strange, colorful detour before arriving on E major. 2 more clips from the Invasion of Time follow this, returning to musical form. In part 2, K9 is descending the ramp on the way to blast the transduction barrier. More neighboring chords than a descending organ melody make the action explicit. The ending D minor, here signaling a scene change, allowed a link to music of part 4 as Andred, the future Mr. Leela, and K9 arrive at the President's office to await the Doctor. After a brief harmonic jaunt, shifting up a minor third, the clip ends dramatically with a bitonal sound, D minor under C sharp major. We shall soon see more examples of when the popping chords on top mix unusually with the harmony below. Another very brief clip, next from Nightmare of Eden. Later in part 1, Romana heads off in a lift, while the Doctor and ship's captain Rig, with K9 in tow, head elsewhere. The timpani begins, the muted horns offer a K9-y figure, while the organ above bounces. Now, the climax of the waltz portion, an epic, 30 seconds long gun battle from part 4 of the Armageddon Factor. This culminating story of the Key to Time season features 10 clips used in the suite. Here, on guard in a corridor on Zeos, K9 detects hostiles approaching, and Princess Astra and the wounded Merak hide. Sure enough, 2 black-cowled figures sent by the evil Shadow appear, and they and our good dog dodge through the corridors, exchanging fire. Because of the constant gun sound effects, this was the most difficult segment to transcribe. The music of the Armageddon Factor is distinctive also because Simpson's harmonic choices become more daring, the upper and lower harmonies not matching, but combining to sound great. The prelude to this battle is a good example, with A minor in the xylophone and organ, but D minor in the horn ensemble. This relationship continues with a shift up a minor third. Peaking on A flat major, the harmony shifts beneath to a tense, dominant flat 5 chord, crescendoing as the battle begins. Thanks to the now familiar K9 style, you can actually hear in this passage when he is on screen or his adversaries. Low register chorales in the horn ensemble are answered by high register parallel major triads in the xylophone and organ. There are sudden disorienting shifts between triple and duple rhythms. Towards the end of the passage, the ensemble rises together in dominant 7th chords, followed by climaxing diminished chords under the high register A major. In the program at this point, there is an intervening scene with Astra and Merak, the music tailing off. When we return to K9, forcing the evil mutes into the transmat shaft, the music reprises from the rising dominant chords. The music again tails off in almost the same way, but a final xylophone flourish ends the battle, so the suite cuts there directly without repeats. Despite lacking emotions, K9 seems very pleased with himself. The battle music concludes the waltz segment, and after this held chord, we set off on the second half of the piece with another metric modulation back to 120 beats per minute. Funny enough, I did find one segment in waltz time, but at this slower tempo, so it seemed a suitable start. Late in part 3 of The Creature from the Pit, the Doctor reluctantly consents to K9 accompanying Romana, Corella, and guards deeper into the pit to seek and kill the creature. Here below upper neighbor chords, the A minor harmony stays steady over a sinking bass. The ensemble joins together for some vacillating chords to end. Back in 4/4 time, we return to earlier in the same episode, as K9 and Romana come upon astrologer Organon in the pit, fretting about his friend the Doctor, trapped behind a shell barrier, apparently with the creature. Harkening back to an earlier waltz segment from this same episode, the extremes of xylophone and cello beat out a rhythm with sustained chords in between. A swelling crescendo to finish is represented by a rocking figure in the left hand. The xylophone finishes with more white key chords on the piano, but finishes with a surprise F sharp major above C major. A little more octatonics there. Next are two groovy segments from part 4 of The Invasion of Time, both featuring K9 and Andred creeping through the corridors of Gallifrey towards the President's office. You may remember that we've already heard the music of their arrival. Underneath rhythmic chords in the horn ensemble, the organ is popping again, mostly playing inversions of the harmony, reordering the same 3 notes and making a melody out of it. The end of the first clip resolves to E major, and there are a few intervening scenes before the second clip. But it resolves as if the other music wasn't there. It's as if Simpson knew I would one day put this music together. Lol. I love the beginning of the second segment because, whether by accident or design, the organ is playing not just minor, but minor 7th chords, and all of a sudden I feel like it's the introduction of an Elton John song that I've never heard. Bum, 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 Gallifrey and freedom, bum, bum, da, da. Without pause, we head to another clip from part 4 of the Armageddon Factor. Immediately after the gun battle, K9 is lured into the transmat and sent to the dark, mysterious lair of the Shadow. Unsure where he is, he begins to explore as the music begins. Quieter and more pensive, this music features a middle register melody by the horn, with xylophone and organ chords above, occasionally in triplet rhythm. Once again, the 2 harmonies don't match as in the Invasion of Time music, making it that much richer and colorful. Now, in contrast, an exciting and fun-to-play clip from part 5, another trip through the Shadow's lair, but K9 is now under the Shadow's control, and his quarry is his former master. Starting on D minor, the bass begins a stepwise descent, while the subtly shifting harmony is answered by rhythmic pops in the extreme registers. The right hand has a workout here, quickly shifting from the upper notes of the harmony to the upper register xylophone pops. Over to part 3 of Nightmare of Eden, where K9 arrives at his post outside the TARDIS, prepared to activate a device that will help separate the 2 ships. This time, the xylophone has a single line melody over colorful harmony that rises and falls before settling on a suspenseful B-natural bass. Back to the Armageddon Factor, part 6, where the miniaturized Doctor and Drax have hidden inside K9, now released from the Shadow's control, and plan to use him as a Trojan dog. This is a more elaborate example of the staggered shifting of harmony that we heard earlier in a Stones of Blood clip. The xylophone shifts from minor to major triads, then up a half step. The harmony below is all minor chords, but shifting up a half step 2 beats earlier than the xylophone. This results in the same type of bitonal harmony we heard at the end of an Invasion of Time clip in the waltz section, major chord atop minor chord. After a short breath, we get another callback from part 2 of Nightmare of Eden, this time calling back a waltz clip from part 1. The Doctor and Romana leave Trist's lab, and after the scientist does a double take at K9, he switches off the CET machine his electric zoo. Once again, the minor harmony, doubled in octaves in the upper register, rises in minor thirds, this time reaching the same starting B-flat minor. Next, the Invasion of Time has one final clip now in part 5. Leela, Andred, and Rodan arrive back at the TARDIS and unlock it as K9 keeps them covered. This is a charming segment with more cascading white key chords in the organ to start. After a few black keys interrupt, things settle on a beautiful E minor 9, another great example of extended, colorful harmonies. Now, back to the Armageddon factor for 4 clips in a row. The first 2 are very brief, and to start, we head back to part 5 for a comic scene where the reactivated K9 startles Drax, who jumps on his workbench. Over 2 swelling minor chords in the bass and cello, the xylophone's 3 minor chords add up to a slightly thicker version of the bitonal harmony I discussed. The next brief scene is from part 4, the opening of the scene which culminates in the gun battle. K9, on guard, stops and questions Astra and Merak. We've had a little bit of rapid-fire 16th note rhythms so far, and this clip is the beginning of a whole lot of them. Over A minor harmony, the xylophone and organ fire off a dizzying array of major and minor chords, some very foreign, before resolving again on A minor. Perhaps the coolest 3 seconds in the whole piece. The first of the 2 longer clips comes from way back in part 1 and is again music of our faithful dog heeding his master's whistle. Over 3 successive minor chords sounding like a strummed cello, the organ and xylophone pop out chords in the Dorian mode of each minor. This segment's rhythm has a distinctly William Tell overture vibe, but it's a pretty subtle joke. The second longer clip, from the beginning of part 5, is one of my absolute favorites. K9 is now under the control of the Shadow and orders him to be his eyes and ears. After a powerful D minor start, we get a sequence of 3 of the now famous bitonal chords, and these rise in minor thirds and increase in rhythmic pace. Reaching fortissimo, the harmony switches to minor major 9 chords and again shifts up from D in minor thirds. However, the version on A flat breaks the pattern. Following this, A flat locks in the bass as we shift back and forth between the minor 9 chord and various diminished harmonies that feature colorful major chords in parallel on top. And a harmonized inner line by the horns. Affirmative. Next up is that musically devious cue from part 4 of The Horns of Nimon, the last episode of Doctor Who with a Dudley Simpson credit. Sorak, Skonon military captain, has stolen into scientist Soldeed's laboratory and reactivated K9, hoping to control the machine. Our hero gets the upper hand and escapes from the lab, locking Sorak in. This is actually 2 clips, briefly separated by the scene indicating Sorak is trapped. First, as K9 makes his way out of the lab, Sorak looking on impotently. The bass rocks back and forth in tritones, below minor chords, and a bouncing half-step back and forth. After the bass again rises in minor thirds, it settles briefly on F, and suddenly a trio of xylophone, horn, and clarinet plays a rising chromatic melody. The mallets are in 16th notes with the winds in 8th notes, an effect I replicate. Reaching a peak as K9 closes and locks the door, we skip ahead a few seconds to see him heading through the corridor to find his master and mistress. This is perhaps the most devious, challenging segment of all, for the accompaniment continues its happy duple rhythms while the trio melody switches to triplets. This 3 on top of 2, 6 on top of 4 effect is very thorny to perform because neither hand plays every beat and the notes line up only so often. I had to spend a lot of time working out the math of these few seconds, and only that brief 4/3 rhythm from episode 33's The Sand Minor compares in rhythmic complexity. complexity. The exciting finish is nearly upon us and begins with two final clips from the Armageddon Factor. In part 5, the Shadow orders his new robot dog Minion to find the Doctor and offer him Romana's life for the key to time. Although the xylophone part is mostly major chords, it's combined with augmented chords below, creating a menacing harmony. Then over to the last clip from part 6, as Trojan K9 prepares to blast his way into the Shadow's chamber so the Doctor and Drax can rescue Romana and Astra and retake the key to time. Made entirely of major chords, the horn ensemble hops back and forth in whole steps with the xylophone supporting on the beat. The second measure is a transposition of the first, and the music peaks on a triumphant C-sharp major. To fulfill this heroic end, we return to the final music of Part 4 of Nightmare of Eden. With the adventure resolved, K9 and company arrive back at the TARDIS. Relieved, the nightmare is over. The xylophone and keyboard announce octave A-flats over rising harmony that moves from major through diminished back to major. Simpson's final chords humorously twist the harmony to augmented, and the solo bass clarinet offers a wry, restrained wag of the tail. I hope you loved my discussion of K9's music in episode 39, part 2, as much as you love K9. Next time, we'll be enjoying and relishing the rhythmic and harmonic beauty of the score. Subscribe, like, share, and comment. See you next time.